Welcome back to Books in 10. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that we're giving away an iPhone when we hit 10,000 subscribers. So if you haven't already hit that like and subscribe button. All right, let's dive into the world of George Orwell's 1984. We're entering the world of Winston Smith living in Oceania, where Big Brother's always watching and the thought police are always listening.
Yeah, it's really striking, how this world just how totalitarian control just permeates every aspect of life. And it's not just about physical surveillance, it's about controlling the mind.
Yeah, that's right. The telescreens are everywhere, but then you also have Newspeak, this language that's designed to limit thought itself. It's like Orwell was saying that by controlling language, you control the mind. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think you consider Winston's act of rebellion just buying a diary and writing his thoughts. In our world, it's mundane, but in Oceania, it's a dangerous thought crime. And this just highlights just how much the party really wants to just eradicate individuality and independent thinking.
Yeah, and it's not even just about limiting what people say. It's about rewriting history and manipulating the truth. Like the enemy of the state can change overnight, and no one seems to even notice. How does Orwell use this to make a larger point?
Well, this concept of doublethink is really key to it all. It's not just about accepting lies, it's about believing two contradictory things at the same time. It's this form of self-induced mind control that allows the party to maintain absolute power. Think about Winston's internal struggle. He knows that the party is manipulating history, but he still grapples with his own memories.
That's what makes it so unsettling, right? It really makes you question your own perception of reality.
Yeah.
But, amidst all of this oppression, there's Winston rebelling in his own small way. Is that futile, or is there something powerful about these small acts of resistance?
That's a great question. It's something that it seems like Orwell was grappling with himself. On the one hand, you see Winston's rebellion is ultimately crushed, but on the other hand, it shows us that the human spirit just yearns for freedom, even in the most oppressive circumstances. It suggests that the desire for truth and individual expression just can't be fully extinguished.
Now, what about the proles? They seem to represent this different side of Oceania, right? They're less controlled and more connected to their primal instincts.
Yeah, they are a fascinating element in the book. Think about Winston's observations, their arguments, their love for the lottery, that woman singing in the courtyard. They're holding on to this sense of humanity that the party just seeks to suppress in party members.
The lottery itself is interesting. On the surface, it's just entertainment for the proles, but on a deeper level, isn't it really just a tool of manipulation?
Absolutely. It provides this false sense of hope, and it distracts from the grim realities of life in Oceania. This connects to the party's overall strategy. It's not just about controlling people's actions, but it's about controlling their hopes, their desires, their very consciousness.
And then there's the relationship between Winston and Julia. It's more than just a love story, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Love and intimacy become acts of rebellion in this world where those emotions are tightly regulated. Their secret meetings, their willingness to join the brotherhood, it all signifies a yearning for human connection and freedom.
But as we know, the rebellion doesn't end well. The betrayal, the torture that Winston endures in the Ministry of Love, it's just heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
What do you think Orwell is trying to convey through scenes like that?
It's disturbing, especially O'Brien's chilling explanation that the party's goal is to reshape its enemies, not just eliminate them. They want complete psychological domination. They're using pain and fear not just to punish, but to break down the individual's sense of self.
That brings us to Room 101, this place that seems to just represent ultimate fear. Like with Ampleforth arrested for leaving the word God in a poem and his terror of Room 101, or Parsons proud of his daughter for turning him in for thought crime. What strikes you about those examples?
It's about the party's absolute intolerance for any deviation from its ideology, no matter how small. But Parsons also highlights the chilling effectiveness of the party's indoctrination. He loves Big Brother, even as he's being dragged away.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how easily we can become complicit in systems that dehumanize us, isn't it?
It really makes you question the line between victim and perpetrator, doesn't it? And how susceptible we might all be to manipulation and control.
And of course, there's Winston's final transformation at the Chestnut Tree Cafe. He betrays Julia, embraces doublethink, and seems to lose his capacity for independent thought. What makes this ending so impactful even decades later?
It's bleak. It offers no easy answers or triumphant rebellions. Orwell leaves us with this haunting image of Winston, a shell of his former self, completely absorbed into the party's ideology. He's no longer a rebel, he's a cautionary tale. But it's this bleakness that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power control and the resilience of the human spirit.
And that brings us to the question.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for us today? We'll dive into that when we return. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Books in 10.
It's fascinating how, even though 1984 was published decades ago, the themes of surveillance and truth manipulation and suppression of individuality just feel more relevant now than ever.
Yeah, it's true. With all the technology we have today, are we sleepwalking into a world of constant surveillance and information control?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. The sheer amount of data that's collected about us online, the algorithms that just curate what we see and what we hear, the advancements in surveillance technology, it's not that far-fetched to imagine a future where, like, every move is tracked and our preferences are analyzed and our thoughts are potentially even monitored.
Right. And what about the way that language is used to manipulate and control? We see it in politics and advertising, even in our everyday interactions.
Yeah, Orwell's concept of newspeak, a language designed to limit thought, is more relevant than ever. It reminds us that, those who control language can shape perceptions and beliefs.
It's like that saying, if you don't have the words to express something, you can't even think it.
Exactly. Language constructs our reality, and so those who control it wield immense power. But Orwell doesn't just leave us in despair. He shows us the power of individual resistance, even in the face of just overwhelming odds.
Right, Winston may have been defeated, but his initial acts of rebellion, like writing in his diary, show us that even small acts of defiance can chip away at a seemingly impenetrable system.
Yeah, there's hope in that. It suggests that the yearning for freedom can't be entirely extinguished. I always think about that quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
That's powerful. It reminds us that we have a responsibility to speak out against injustice and challenge the status quo and fight for the values that we believe in.
Absolutely. But how do we avoid falling into the traps that Orwell laid out? How do we stay vigilant in a world that's increasingly complex and interconnected?
Yeah, it's a tough question. What do you think?
Well, awareness is crucial.
Mm.
We need to be critical of the information that we consume, question the narratives that are presented to us, and be mindful of how language is used to manipulate our emotions. We can't just passively accept everything we see and hear.
So we need to become more discerning consumers of information.
Exactly. We need to actively engage, seek out diverse perspectives, and think critically for ourselves.
Orwell seems to be encouraging us to be more skeptical, especially of authority figures. Don't just blindly accept what you're told, even if it comes from a source you think you trust.
Yeah. Critical thinking is essential in a world just saturated with information. And this brings us to another important question. What about our relationship with technology? It's such an integral part of our lives, but it can also be a tool for surveillance and control.
It's a tricky balance. It feels like we're constantly being asked to give up a little bit of our privacy and freedom for convenience or access.
And we need to be aware of those trade-offs. Are we sacrificing our privacy for fleeting benefits? Are we letting algorithms dictate our worldview?
It's a lot to consider. Orwell really packed 1984 with ideas that are still so relevant today.
It's the hallmark of great literature. It keeps prompting us to ask new questions and re-examine our assumptions. It challenges us to think critically about ourselves and the world that we live in.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to ask you, dear listener, what aspects of 1984 resonate most strongly with you? What parallels do you see between Orwell's dystopian world and our own reality?
It's a question worth pondering, especially as we navigate the complexities of the digital age.
Orwell may have written 1984 over 70 years ago, but his message is as potent as ever. Be vigilant, be critical, be engaged. The fight for freedom and individuality is an ongoing one, a fight that takes place both in the world around us and within ourselves.
And that's something we'll explore further when we return.
Okay, so we've been talking about, these themes of surveillance and manipulation and the fight for freedom in 1984.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to process, right? But before we wrap up our deep dive into this, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, which was, the idea of these small acts of resistance. What can we as individuals do to resist these forces that are, seeking to limit our thinking or control our actions?
Right. That's the big question. And there's not really an easy answer, is there? But I think one thing we can do is cultivate this critical thinking. We need to question the information that we're given, look for those biases, and seek out alternative perspectives.
So it's about becoming more media literate, more aware of how information can be used to manipulate us.
Absolutely. And it's about engaging in, thoughtful dialogue even, or perhaps especially when it's uncomfortable. We need to be willing to listen to those differing viewpoints and engage in civil discourse even when we disagree.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. It feels like we've lost the ability to have those meaningful conversations across these, ideological divides. But maybe that's another form of control, keeping us isolated and suspicious of anyone who thinks differently.
Exactly. It's a tactic as old as time, divide, and conquer. But if we can resist that urge to retreat into our own echo chambers, if we can embrace, respectful debate and this open-mindedness, then we can start to chip away at those forces that are, trying to control and manipulate us.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this fight for freedom isn't just about these grand gestures or political revolutions. It's about the choices we make every day, the information that we consume, the conversations that we have, the way we even interact with technology. These are all battlegrounds in this fight for, our minds and our autonomy.
Right. And it's a fight that requires this constant vigilance. I think Orwell reminds us that, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not just against those external threats, but against, the complacency and that self-censorship that can creep into our own minds.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought, but it's also an empowering one.
Yeah.
We have more agency than we often realize. We can choose to be informed, to be critical, to be engaged. We can choose to resist the forces that seek to, diminish our humanity.
And that's ultimately what 1984 calls us to do. It's not just a warning about the dangers of totalitarianism. It's a call to action, an invitation to participate in the ongoing struggle for freedom and individual expression.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've only, scratched the surface of this complex and challenging book, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought. And what will you choose to do with that food for thought? Well, that's up to you.
And if you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out some of Orwell's other works like Animal Farm and Homage to Catalonia. They provide some additional insights into, his worldview and his concerns about power and control and the human condition.
And there are also numerous adaptations of 1984, films, plays, operas, each offering a unique interpretation of Orwell's vision. It's really fascinating to see how artists have reimagined, this timeless classic for different audiences and different eras.
Yeah, it speaks to the enduring power of Orwell's ideas that they continue to resonate across generations and inspire these new creative interpretations.
Absolutely. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of 1984. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have.
It's been a pleasure discussing this very thought-provoking novel with you.
And remember, hit that like and subscribe button for a chance to win an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. We'll see you next time on Books in 10.